Hello, folks. Welcome to our webinar today. Thank you for coming. My name's Anthony. I work here at PhotoCare. I am our sales and support professional. I specialize in medium format cameras and Capture One Pro software. We are going to be talking today about working in Capture One and using the wonderful tool set that they have to manipulate portrait images. It's an area that we have had a lot of requests to have a webinar on, and we haven't had a chance to do it yet. So it's pretty exciting that we're going to do this today. I do want to wait a couple of minutes because we do have a lot of people who signed up today. I want to make sure most of them are in. So I'm going to just chat for a couple seconds to you, and then I'm going to introduce our host who is going to be presenting the material. I will be available as tech support and asking questions. If this is your first time using Zoom, please note at the bottom of your screen is going to be a little tool tab. There's two areas of note. There's a chat, and we're going to use the chat mostly for information and links that we're going to be giving to you. If you have specific technical questions, please put them in the Q&A portal and not in the chat. It is a lot easier for us to keep track of the questions in the Q&A portal. The chat, it just gets too filled up and we may miss it. So please, if you have a technical question or something you want to know about that we are talking about today, please put it in the Q&A. Also, please try to keep the questions relevant to what we are discussing, portrait editing and the tool sets that we are talking about. Things we plan on covering today are going to be general adjustments, skin tone correction, making the subject pop through composition and light. We are going to be talk about creating a mood. We're going to be talking about the retouching tools that are available to us, as well as dodging and burning and how you accomplish those in Capture One as well. We are not going to be talking about the new features of Capture One 22 today. This is not a Capture One 22 webinar. It is only a portrait editing webinar. For the new features of Capture One, we will be 22. We will be talking about that at a later date. I am going to drop into the chat right now some of our information, just so you all have it. So if you want to take a look at that in the chat, I've dropped in some links and some information. I just do a little bit of a reminder there, talking about making sure to send the questions through the Q&A portal. I've dropped in some of our email addresses for our sales department, our rental department. Our phone number is there as well, because I know we do have a lot of people attending today that are new to PhotoCare. We are going to be recording this presentation today. It is going to live on our YouTube page. You can either go to YouTube and search PhotoCare NY. Please click and subscribe. We do have a whole series of Capture One webinars that we have presented in the past. Or you can just click the link that's right there for YouTube to see what we have. We also are working on having more events, more webinars. We are slowly trying, hopefully, current environmental things going on, trying to do some in-person events here or there. So you can check out our events page to see what else we are working on. I've also linked our Capture One category on our website. So if you do need to purchase a Capture One 22 license key, either a pro key or for one of the specific versions of the camera, Fuji, Nikon, Sony, Leica, we do have all of those available for sale. And because we are doing the webinar today, there is a discount code for that. It's C1SAVE20, which is a 20% discount on all Capture One license keys that we are able to sell. So while the folks showing up seem to have tapered off a little bit, I'm going to introduce our presenter today, our real host, and it's amazing to have Maria here. Maria, make sure you unmute. There we go. Maria Lopez is our Capture One, one of our wonderful Capture One reps. Liz is also here. She's going to be mostly in the chats answering some questions. But Maria is coming to us from Spain, and she is also a Capture One trainer. She is super knowledgeable about this, and she is going to really help us get dialed in on how to use Capture One to edit portraits. So I'm going to turn it over to Maria right now. And please make sure any questions you have, put them through our Q&A port, and please enjoy. Thanks.
Thanks, Anthony, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria. I work for Capture One, and I'm really excited to be here today for this Capture One webinar. It's actually my first class here with PhotoCare. I hope it's not going to be the last one. And I really hope that you're going to enjoy it. as Anthony said, we're not going to be talking specifics of Capture One 22 today, but what we're going to be doing is something that you have requested many times, which is a portrait editing workshop. So let's just jump right into it if you want. I can see we have quite a lot of people around here. So let's just get started. I'm going to share my screen. If you have any questions, please post them on the Q&A section, as Anthony said, and we'll be taking a look at them from time to time. So Anthony is going to be bringing them on to me if needed. So there you go. Please let me know if you can all see my screen. You should be seeing my screen, and please let me know if you hear me and see me well. All right, so portrait editing. We're going to discuss some of quite a lot of things. All of the sections that are going to be discussed are right there on the chat. Yeah, so we're going to be talking first. Let's try to build a workflow from the scratch. Generally, when I'm doing editing, not only portrait necessarily, I'm trying to follow the same steps. Nothing's written in stone when it's about photo editing, so you don't need to take everything literally as I'm saying it, but just try to create a workflow that makes sense for you, something that is logical for you, and your logic doesn't necessarily have to be the same as mine. But I find that following always the same steps is going to help me create, where to look at, basically. So what I try to do when I'm editing is try to get started with the general things, like going over to the general things, and then step by step just going into more specific things. So it's kind of like a, sorry, I forgot the word. Sorry, I'm not a native English speaker, as you can probably see. But it's, yeah, a funnel, sorry. It's kind of like a funnel. So I'm trying to just do it like this, to go from the more generic stuff toward the more specific. And then in the end of the workflow, I always do a different layer with color. I'm not sure if all of you who are here today are really familiar with Capture One already, or it's your first step. So I'm trying to keep it like a mix between a simple workflow and advanced tools. I hope that all of you are able to follow. And if not, you can just go and check out all of the other Capture One webinars with PhotoCare, because they're all amazing. Okay, so when I say going from the generic to the specific, I mean that we're going to use a lot of layers, like not crazy layers, but we're going to do some layers, right? So this is the two examples that I prepared for today. We're going to be editing these two different portraits. This is already edited, so I'm just going to very briefly show you before and after, so you can see from the start what we are trying to achieve, and so you can follow the steps, okay? So this is before. We can also do it like split view, which is a little bit more dynamic. So this is before. This is the raw files as they came into Capture One, and this is the after. As you can see, it's a lot about setting the mood. And how do we set the mood? We set the mood by playing around with lights and shadows and composition, where you can't see the before and after of composition, but there is some cropping applied here. And the idea is to use the resources that we have within the editing process to try to make our subject pop. So this is what we're going to try to achieve. Let's just start maybe by this first portrait, and I'm going to use this as a first example to make you see what I mean. So just going to start by resetting the whole picture, in case that some of you out there are not really familiar with raw editing. You need to know that raw editing is always by default non-destructive. Why is this? This is because we're working with raw data, and raw data can always be reset to what it used to be. It's not like editing in Photoshop, for example, where you are creating different layers and you work with an image file, and whatever you're doing into that file, if you're not very careful and you know your workflow very well, you can end up with a little bit of a mess. In Capture One, it's not the same. So you can do everything that you want. You can do layers, you can do cropping, you can do whatever, and then you can always press this magic button of reset, and then you can go back to what you used to have. So first thing that we need to look at when we're looking at a portrait, the first thing that I like to do is taking a look at cropping. We're going to try to use the lines that we have in the picture, and we're going to try to center the attention in our subject here. This is a really beautiful model. So the cropping tool is up here in the toolbar. Let's just choose it. And by default, it would come with an original aspect ratio. It means that it will just respect whatever the original aspect ratio of the image is. But sometimes in portraits, I like playing around with different kind of aspect ratios. For this one, this is part of an editorial shot. So what I'm going to do is not to try to maintain the original aspect ratio. What I'm going to do is go for a 4:5 aspect ratio. I really like to use this for portraits. I use this aspect ratio a lot, first of all, because I really like it. It looks like really harmonic to me. And also because if we think of editorial shoots, by default, like before the digital times, they were made to be printed. And 4:5 is a very common aspect ratio for magazines. So in my experience, it gives me the impression that it's more like a real editorial shot if we do this kind of aspect ratio. So this is what I'm going to do. Once that we have selected the cropping that we want to apply, let's do something like around there. We can also rotate it from the corners. Try to make it a little bit. All right, there you go. I think this is a nice cropping. I think that we can just open it up just a little bit, just to make sure that we are getting like the mood on the window. Something around there. Okay, I think that's fine. That's a nice aspect ratio that's going to help us to center the attention in the model, because otherwise it would have too much air, which we might want to have for some purposes. But in this case, I think that we can just stay with a closer one. So this will be the first step. So the next thing that I would do in this case, once that I have my cropping ready, I would start to work with a little curve and a little bit of color. So first of all, I do lighting normally. But in this case, as we have a Fuji raw file, I'm going to take advantage of the Fujifilm film simulations to do my general mood on the photo. Normally, I would do this from different color grading tools, but actually the film simulations are just working great, not only for portraits, but for all the other kinds of stuff. This is, in this case, a GFX 100 file. And if we go over here to our color tool tab, into the base characteristics tools, we have the curve. And by default, it comes in automatic, which is whatever the camera was set to shoot with. So normally that would be a Provia profile. Please keep in mind that all of these simulations are just available for Fuji files. So if you are Canon or Sony users or whatever other users, you're unfortunately not going to be able to have this. But I really like working with the simulations when I'm working with Fuji files. So let's see what we have here. If you don't know them well, you can just go around them. You're going to get an instant preview, and you can just see what you like the best. You have color and black and white. I really like the classic negative. This may be a little bit overdone in this case, or the classic chrome. I think I'm going to go for the Astia simulation because it's nice, a little bit warmer, and that's going to be looking really nice with our skin tone. We'll talk about skin tone in a minute. So this would be the base. Now that we have selected our base curve, let's do a little bit of color and contrast, light and contrast. So what I like to do, we could just go ahead and jump and start working straight from the background and do things like brightness or levels or contrast or something like that. What I like to do instead, and this is part of my workflow that I always try to repeat, is instead of using the background, I'm just going to start creating my first layer. That's going to be a new fill adjustment layer. It's over here in the layer panel. You can see the layer panel is located in different tool tabs because the layer workflow is really integrated within Capture One. So I created a fill adjustment layer. It means that there is already a mask that is covering all of my image, and that's exactly what I want, because this is going to be just basic adjustments. There you go. And the reason why I do this is, for example, if I go too crazy with contrast, and then as I start to stack my adjustments in different layers, it gets a little bit too much. Instead of just coming into the layer and playing around with the different tools that I used, I can just reduce the opacity, and I can keep it in any point between 0 and 100. And that's, in my experience, really useful, especially when you work with different tools, because you can keep track of where some effects are coming from. So this is what I like to do: create a fill adjustment layer and use it as a basic adjustment layer. Once that I have done this, instead of working with brightness or contrast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight into the curve panel. It doesn't matter if you're not really experienced with curves. The curves that I'm going to be using today are really simple. These are the typical S-shaped curves that are just going to let us apply some contrast into the image. And in Capture One, we have a very interesting curve for portraits, which is a Luma curve. Let's just see. I'm just going to duplicate this variant, to clone this variant. And I'm going to show you the difference between working with the RGB curve and the Luma curve. In the second one, I'm going to use the RGB, which you already know from other softwares. So I'm going to just create this little S-shaped curve, just like so. And you can see that contrast is looking nice, but something weird is happening with color. The fact is that when you're working with the RGB curves, this is not just affecting light, this is also affecting the different RGB channels, as you can probably deduce from this naming. And what it's going to do with the red channels specifically, it's going to saturate it. It's going to give us a very saturated red and yellow. So as you can imagine, for portrait, this is not ideal. So what we're going to do instead is work with the Luma curve. This is like no curve for now. So instead of working with RGB, just going over to the Luma panel, and I'm going to do exactly the same kind of curve. Maybe just like a little bit like that. There you go. So if I compare these two side by side, you can see that there is a huge difference. This one is a little bit more desaturated because with the Luma curve, we are just working with the Luma channel. That can create some differences between lighting and saturation. But on the other hand, I don't have this radioactive orange thing on the window, which doesn't look so pleasant. So I'm going to stick with variant number 1 to go on with my editing. If we have the impression that it's a little bit too desaturated, we can just come over to the saturation slider and improve saturation just a little bit, just like so. But that's going to do it in a controlled way, not just like reds and yellows. That's going to saturate everything generally. Let's just open up the shadows just a little bit. I really like playing around with shadows and highlights and the curves at the same time, because I have the impression like by doing this, we can have a deep contrast and at the same time, a lot of detail in the shadows, which is normally what we would want to aim for. So I think that this is looking good for now. Next thing we want to do, I think that we have a really nice basic adjustments layer. The next thing that we want to look at is skin tone. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to create a different layer. In this case, it's going to be an empty adjustment layer. We could also do this from the background for your information, but I really like to keep my skin normally on a separate layer in case some of the tones are similar. You're going to see why I'm doing this. So I'm going to create this layer. I'm going to call it skin. For now, there is no mask. So what I'm going to do is just to create a very simple radial gradient mask, just like so. You can see that it's drawing the mask outside the circle. So what I'm going to do is come over here to my layer and invert the mask. There you go. And I'm going to make sure that my mask is covering everything that I need skin-wise. It doesn't matter if it's not skin only, it doesn't matter if it's like the sweater or the trousers or whatever, or the watch, because I'm going to do a color selection within this with this mask, right? So what we are trying to do here is just to get the skin separated from the rest of the photo through the mask and also through a color selection. So once I have my mask, I'm going to move over to my color tools, which are here on this panel. And let's work a little bit with the color editor. If you're already familiar with the color editor, you know that it has 3 different modules: the basic, the advanced, and the skin tone. The basic module, it's just like any HSL control. So for example, I can just choosing the blue, because you're going to see it very clearly, I can just desaturate the blues. You can see that only whatever is inside the mask is affected, which is great. With the advanced one, I can do a little bit more of close color selection. I'm not going to use this one for today because the one that interests us is a skin tone one. Just going to make the panel a little bit bigger so you can see it better. So how does this work? You can see that we have a little dropper here. This is what we want to use. Let's just choose a dropper. And this is going to let us pick our sample for skin tone correction. It's important where we pick our sample. Let's just pick it in somewhere that it's rather neutral. So for example, around here, we don't want to do the cheeks and we don't want to do any part in the shadows. Let's just do, something like neutral. And let's just select this option, view selected color range. You can see that everything that is within this color range was selected, and everything that is not selected is going to be grayed out. This is great because you can already see that we are not selecting the sweater at all. We're just selecting the skin, and we can probably get rid of this part of the lips. Normally when I'm doing this, the skin tone correction, I don't like to work with the lips because that's going to create kind of a phantomy feel. So I just prefer to keep the lips outside of the selection as much as possible. So something like there. You can see that I deselected parts of the image, and then I just have my skin, which is what interests me in this case. And now, something that I want to correct is like the general skin tone. It's probably a little bit too orange. So we're going to try to find a hue that is flattering. So if I go over to the left, to the right with the hue, we're going to see that it goes more towards the green tones, and over to the left, it's going more towards the magenta tones. So I'm just going to try to keep it at a natural level, something around there. That's going to be fine. But we have a second problem also with the skin tone, which is the difference in the hand, in the skin tone of the hand and the face. There is different reasons why someone would have such a difference in skin tones. When we have purple, magenta tones like this in the skin, it's probably because this guy was really cold. Someone should have turned the heating on. And this causes that, or hands or like some part of our body might go like red or purple or something like that. So we're going to try to solve this difference because this is not looking really natural and flattering. So in this case, we have the uniformity sliders. So the uniformity sliders are going to try to uniform the sample, the skin tone to the initial sample that we took. So I'm just going to do this like really widely so you can see the difference. If I go over to 100, you can see that the difference in the skin tone has vanished basically. So we came from having like an orange face and a purple hand over to having everything within the same range. This is probably a little bit too far, but I'm just going to show you what it's doing and then I will readjust it. Same goes with the saturation. So if I go all the way over to the right, you can see that now the hue and the saturation are also uniform. There is a third one with the brightness. I normally don't like to do this one because it starts looking pretty unnatural. So normally I don't touch this one, but I work a lot with hue and saturation. So let's just go over to 0 again, and let's try to do this in a way that makes sense. So I think that around here it's looking nice, and a little bit with the saturation too. I think that's looking quite nice. Let's just see the before and after just of this layer. There you go. This is the before. This is the after. I think it's looking much better. Also keep in mind when you're working with the hue and the saturation sliders, it might be that the general skin tone is affected. So I think it's now too greenish. So I'm just going to readjust the general hue over more to the magenta side of things. The skin tone selection, or choice for skin tone is going to have a direct effect on the perception of the person who is going to see this photo. If we go over to the greens, and we make this person look like too pale, it might be giving the feeling that this person is sick or something like that, which we generally don't want to. We sometimes might want to do it for some reason, but we generally don't want to. If we go too red, it might be giving the feeling that this person just came out from running a marathon. So we also don't want to do that. Let's try to keep skin tone something around here. And I think that's looking nice. And it helps us correct this really nasty difference just with only this one tool, which is amazing, because if you were doing this in another software, you probably need to, depends on what you're doing, you probably need to take it to a retouch software, do some masking, do some curves, we'll do some color balance. And I really like this tool because it's so easy and intuitive to work with it. It might be not so obvious from the beginning, but once that you understand the way it works and how powerful it is, you're able to correct basically any skin tone right within Capture One, right from within your raw file, with all the advantages to it. So I think that is looking quite nicely. The only thing that we would have left to do here is to correct some of the blemishes that we have around here. We also have some retouch tools built into Capture One. They are also here in the layer panel. So for this kind of blemishes, we will be normally taking the healing brush. It's the little band-aid. So I'm just going to take it, and that's going to automatically select my healing brush. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. We want to make sure that we have high opacity and flow and a low hardness, because it's going to help us to make it look natural. So what is going to happen? I'm going to just choose this option, display arrows, and I'm not going to pick any sample from the beginning. I'm just going to click right on the image, just a little bit bigger. It's going to click on the image and see what happens. All right, you can see what happens here. There is a sample point for cloning that was automatically selected by Capture One, and it's going to randomly select one that Capture One thinks that it's going to fit in, and then whatever is color and lighting is going to be sample from the pixels around it. So what do we need to know in case that we want to select the sample source by ourselves, which I'm normally doing? It doesn't really matter so much what we are doing, like with the sample we're picking in terms of light and color. What we need to be mindful is texture. So if I'm just going to undisplay arrow so you can see better, it's looking nice, but I think it could still look better if we could select the source point manually, which we can. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to display the arrows, and I'm just going to pick the source point manually. So I'm going to pick another point that has a similar texture. So for example, here, it has a similar texture. There you go. So by pressing and holding the Option key, Alt for Windows users, just going to manually select my source point, something around there. And then I can just brush in, and that's going to select the source point that I did. So if I display arrows now, you can see what I selected. So just like so, I can keep on healing everything. We could get rid of this circle if we wanted to. I wouldn't necessarily do it, but okay, we can do that. We can do some of the bigger ones. We just need to be mindful of what source point we are picking. So that's looking good. That's not looking great. That could look better. Yeah, basically this would be the healing flow. Then we can just do something like that. There you go. And yeah, we just need to be mindful. Don't be desperate if you don't get it right at the first time. It takes some practice, and it takes some patience basically to just identify the source points that you should be picking. Let's just move over to another part of the face. So for example, here, for example, here, that's looking good. Yeah, so basically just keep in mind that what we are looking for here is texture, not so much matching colors or stuff like that, that normally Capture One is going to do a good job at it. So I'm not going to do this so much longer. I know that there is a lot to heal here, and I'm not going to do this forever, because then you're all going to be very bored, and there is some other stuff that I wanted to cover today. But basically you are picking, I guess that you are understanding the whole flow of it. Right, let's just go back and let's see the before and after. Oopsie, I didn't want to do that. Yeah, so this is before healing, this is after healing. As I said, we could work here so much longer. We could work here for, I don't know, probably 1 hour or something like that if we wanted to have like the perfect portrait. I don't have 1 hour today, so I hope that you all get the feel. You're all very quiet. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I hope it's good and you're all very interested and you're just really into it. I don't want to say anything. Remember that you can pose your questions on the Q&A section.
Maria, I actually wanted to have you explain how layers work here versus some other editing software, because I get this question a lot where people will create their layer and they want to know if it can translate to, say, Photoshop or something like that. So would you be able to touch on that real quick for us?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
So basically, it's not possible to translate the Capture One layers into Photoshop, and the reason behind that, it's really logical and simple. The thing is that Capture One, it's not the way that layers work in Capture One is completely different from how layers work in Photoshop. Because in Capture One, we're not working with images. Actually, it might seem sometimes that we're working with images because we see an image preview, but we are not working with images. We're working with raw files. We're working with raw data. So all of these layers, they don't really exist outside of Capture One. It's just ones and zeros that Capture One is creating to modify the image preview that we have. So once that we are sending this file over to Photoshop, for example, or to Affinity Photo for that matter, for any other retouching software, we are forced to export this file, and we are forced to process this raw file into an image file. I mean, it can be a JPEG, a TIFF, or a PSD. They are all image files. And once that we have made this exporting process, all of these layers, they are going to be flattened out into an actual image file. They're not going to be raw data anymore. This is why we can't translate the Capture One layers into Photoshop. So basically, I'm just going to expand my layer panel here so you can take a better look at it. So basically, in Capture One, we can do up to 16 layers. It doesn't seem like a lot, but I've honestly never used them all in my 4 years of teaching Capture One. I've never had the need to use them all because we can combine them also with Luma selection and color selection. So I've honestly never had the need to use more than 16 layers. And they also work in a different way, in the way that, for example, if I change the order of the layers, that's not going to affect the end result. In Photoshop, layer order has an effect on the final file. And here it doesn't, because it doesn't matter. There is no blending modes or anything like that. So that's, on the one hand, it's bad because we don't have so much flexibility, but on the other hand, it's good because it also makes things so much simpler. So basically, Capture One is applying all of the adjustments that we are putting into the images in a strict order, and it's going to be always the same order, and Capture One decided that for us. So we don't have to bother like heating first and playing with the curves later. We can just do it in any order that we want. So I don't know if I answered your question completely. It's kind of really abstract to explain how it works. Just keep in mind that when we are creating a layer, we always need to create a mask, because otherwise nothing will happen. So for example, if I create a new empty layer, and the shortcut to show and hide mask is letter M on the keyboard. So I'm pressing it, you can see nothing happens. So right now there is no mask. And then if I go ahead and try to adjust it, nothing will happen because there is no mask, basically. So if I go ahead and, let's say, for example, invert, then that's going to have an effect, because by inverting the mask, I actually created a mask, a fill layer. So that's going to have an effect. Without mask, there is no effect. So you always need to have some mask. It could be starting from a fill layer, it could be by creating a gradient or by working with brushes. But when you're working with layers, you always need to create the mask.
Maria, I actually have a good question that just came into the Q&A portal, and it is regarding layers. Michael Scott asks, why choose an empty layer or choose a filled layer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for example, for my basic adjustment layer, I chose a fill layer. Why is that? Because it's just a shortcut to having a full layer that's going to give me a mask that covers the whole image. And then when I have this mask that covers the whole image, I can just use it as my background to play around with curves or whatever, or with clarity, whatever I want, right? But on the other hand, when I did the skin layer, I started with the empty layer, and then I created my own mask, and then I created it just by using a radial gradient. And the good thing about the radial gradient is that they are dynamic, and I can just move them around, or I can change feathering or anything like that. So we would start with an empty layer. We are going to create another kind of mask, like gradients or brushing in or something like that. And I would start with a fill layer whenever I just want the adjustments to affect everything in the image.
Thank you.
Perfect. How are we going with time, Anthony? Because I actually have another example, so I can just like cover it.
We have plenty of time. It's 1:30 currently.
Perfect. Right. So I'm going to go over to my second example. This is a completely different kind of portrait. In here, I was trying to go for more like the editorial feel. In this kind of edit, I was trying to go more for a cinematic feel. So I also have a lot of layers here. This is already adjusted. This is the before, and this is what we are trying to achieve. Where I was trying to create a really moody cinematic image with this really interesting character. So what I'm going to do, just like I did before, is reset my adjustments and start all over again from the scratch. So trying to repeat the same workflow as I did before, the first thing I'm going to look at is composition. When we are just trying to create cinematic feel, it's a good idea to go for a panoramic aspect ratio. So coming over here to the cropping as I did before, and instead of choosing 4:5, I'm going to choose 16:9. That's going to give me a basic full HD feel. So let's just do something like that. And I know it doesn't look so cinematic now because that's just going to be the base upon which we're going to build the rest of the feeling of this photo. All right, so first composition checked. Next thing we did in the last photo, and that where I'm going to repeat again, it's working with curves. So same thing as I did before. In this case, I just want my curve to affect everything. So I'm going to choose a new filled adjustment layer. There you go. I'm trying to always name my layers, at least when I'm teaching, not so much in the personal work. I completely fail at it, but for the sake of showing you how things should be done, I'm going to name my layers.
I personally always try to name mine because when I come back to an image later on, I don't want to have to click through them because I use quite a few myself.
Yeah, me too, but it's just like I never learn. So, do what I say, don't do what I do. So yeah, so as I said, basic adjustments. Let's just start again with the new Luma layer. We also have some kind of skin tone things to correct here, but I'm going to take a different approach for this one. But starting out with the Luma layer means that everything will be a little bit more desaturated, which is great in this case. I'm going to go for really deep shadows. And I have the shadow here from the hat, and I'm going to try to really enhance the shadow. And instead of just having the eye blending in here, I'm just going to try to expand the shadow actually to the forehead and to just create like a kind of line of darkness here. So there is a lot like concept to editing. It's not just like going in with the tools and making it look beautiful. Sometimes you don't need it to be beautiful. Sometimes you just need it to be strong. Sometimes you just need it to, you know, tell a story, say something. So this is what we're trying to do here. So really deep shadows I'm going to create. And I'm going to also reduce the whole exposure just by 1/10 of stop, something like that. I think that's looking good. So just with the curve, you can see that we have huge difference. And this is a completely different story from this. Also, the Luma curve is desaturating this a bit. And I think that's looking great. The next thing I'm going to do, and I really do I really use this resource a lot when editing, is creating a vignette. So I'm going to create a vignette in the same way that I did the skin tone correction before, just by creating a new empty adjustment layer. And then I'm going to choose a radial gradient. That's going to be great to let me choose how I want my gradient. I want a really soft gradient, the kind of gradient that you wouldn't feel it's there, just like something very subtle. Something like there. And I'm not going to center it on the face, I'm just going to center it on the part of the image where the light is hitting the face. So something like there. And this part, I'm just going to try to keep more into the shadows. So something like there. Now that I have my vignette, like my radial mask, I can choose whatever tool I want to use to create this darkness. If I go with exposure, it's going to be probably a little bit too drastic. It's going to be a little bit fake. So I prefer doing it from the brightness slider. That's going to be a little bit more subtle. And I'm also going to do it from the levels. If I pick the white point here, down here, I'm going to increase the brightness, increase the white levels. But if I play around with the point up here, it's like, you know, blocking them out, which for this kind of vignettes, I really like to do. So something like there, it's a little bit too dramatic. So what I'm going to do is to reduce the opacity. Let's keep it around 60%. You can see that is looking nice, maybe even less, 50%. I don't like to create effects that are not natural looking. So something around there, 50 is going to be a nice thing. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to bring back some detail into the eyes, because some of them, like this, is a little bit too dark. And I'm going to introduce here a tool that was first introduced in one of the updates of Capture 121, and it quickly became like my top 2 favorite tool, which is the style brushes. And style brushes are just a really nice tool for working with layers in a very intuitive way. So I'm not going to use my custom style brush, it's just going to use whatever is built into Capture One right from the moment you started. So you can't accuse me of saying, hey, but you have this brush that you created and I don't have that. No, I'm just going to use the brushes that everyone has, and it's plenty, really. So if we go over here to enhancements, we have different things that we can do. So for example, we have an iris enhance. So this is looking great for portraits. I'm just going to pick this brush. You can see that the brush tool is already selected. It's going to make it a little bit bigger. And by default, these brushes come with a very low flow. It means that the adjustments will be applied very gradually as I brush them in. And this is a terrific combination to do with the Wacom tablet. You don't necessarily need a Wacom tablet, but if you have one, this is great because it feels like you're really drawing or painting with all the advantages of doing it in a digital way, of course. So you have like a control set option. But working with this low flow, it's going to allow us to brush in very gradually. You can also do it with a mouse, of course. I just really like the combination of the style brushes and the Wacom tablet. It's like a win-win for me. So making it a little bit bigger, just going to brush in once over the eye, just like so, and right over the right eye too. And if it's not enough, then I can just brush in a little bit more. And it seems like I'm not doing anything, but if I go and show you the before and after of the layer, it actually is doing something. What it's doing is adjusting the contrast, lifting up the shadows and the clarity, and I can also do a little bit more of the saturation. So that's going to give us a nice effect on the eyes. I'm not going to take it a little bit, I'm not going to take it too far, because otherwise that's going to be starting to look pretty natural. Even so, I can reduce opacity just a little bit to let it blend in with the original profile, and I think that's looking good. All right, so pretty little adjustment here, but makes a difference. Let's work deeper with the style brushes. We also have a red skin reduction brush, which is great for this case because we have all of these red blemishes, and generally I think that we shouldn't aim to completely change the skin tone here because I think it's part of the story. So I'm just going to take this red skin reduction. I'm just going to brush in wherever we need to correct the red blemishes. So I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger, really low hardness in this case. And I'm just going to start brushing in wherever we have the biggest problems. So probably around here, around the nose, probably around here, on the chin, here. Again, it seems like I'm not doing anything, but if I go before and after, you can see there is already a difference. So I think that I'm just going to do like a general brushing all around. I think that's looking much better. Let's see, this is the before, this is the after. It can be, if we go too far with this adjustment, that the skin will start to look kind of gray. So let's play around with opacity again. So this is where we used to be at 0. And I'm going to keep it around 50% or maybe 60%. So we have a better looking skin tone without it being perfect. I wouldn't never like heal or anything in this kind of skin tone, because what we want to do is specifically try to enhance all of these textures, all of these blemishes. I think it's adding up to the story. So the next thing that I would do, playing further with the style brushes, besides the enhancements, we also have color and light and contrast brushes. So I'm just going to go over to light and contrast. And this is where I have my dodge and burn brushes, which are great because they'll come automatically with the adjustment that you should apply. And then you just need to grab the burn, for example, starting by the burn, and you can already start brushing in. So what would I try to darken here is I'm going to use this brush to create this kind of dark line that I was talking about before. So just like brushing in, just like so, you can see that it's starting to become dark, and I'm going to really try to enhance this darkness on this part of the face. So just like so, and I'm going to try to work a little bit in making all of the shadows a little bit deeper. So normally I would just go where the natural shadows of the image are lying, and I'm just going to try to enhance those. Not going to create any shadows on my own. Normally I would just try to work with what we already have. So for example, we have this little shadows here from the cheekbones, so I'm just going to try to make them darker to try to enhance its shadows, and that's going to create a whole different feel on the image. It's going to create the feel of someone who is like sick or something like that, someone who is like really unhealthy, kind of. Just going to try to create the feel of someone who is like, I don't know, like a kind of someone from a film, you know, someone who it's up to everyone, to each one of you, to imagine the story behind it. So just by enhancing the shadows we already have, you can see that we can have very interesting effects. Just let me do it a little bit further, and then let's just show the before and after just of this layer. Going to be working everywhere where I have these little wrinkles, try to make them more expressive. Keep in mind that if it was another kind of portrait, would you want a really soft skin, you would do the dodging and burning in a completely different way, just like lighting up the places of the parts of the body, of the skin, where there is a wrinkles, trying to light up the wrinkles. That's going to help us reduce the feeling of hardness. And there you go. And also going to do some general darkening around the neck area so we can be more attracted to the face naturally. And let's see the before and after. This is the before. This is the after. You can see there is a huge, huge difference in the expression of the face just by playing around with light and shadows. Another use of this tool, which I really like, is to enhance the vignette that we just created, but in a more organic way. So for example, I can darken this part here. I can darken a little bit the suit. We could also work with the part of the suit that we want to make a little bit darker. So we can create, as I said, just like a more organic kind of vignette. Something like that. That's not going to be super radial. That's going to be more believable, if you like. And then if we do burning, we also have to do some dodging to bring back some of the three-dimensionality of the photo, because if we make everything dark, then the dark parts will not be noticed, and then it's all about playing with contrast. So if we darken stuff, we need to brighten stuff. And what we can darken, we can brighten here. So for example, just going to try to light up the parts of their skin, just like as I did before, just darkening the parts that were already dark. I'm just going to try to lighten the parts that were already light. Something like there. That's going to help us create a better contrast. Something like there. Maybe just a little bit on this eye. It's part of the eyebrow. I'm not going to brighten up a lot of stuff, but something like that. I think that's looking good. And it's the combination between the dodging and the burning that is giving really the effect. It's a combination between both of the things. In here, I did more dodging than burning, but both things are necessary. And normally if you do one, you need to do the other. So this is almost done, but we just need one little thing, one last thing to do the cinematic feel that I was talking about, which is color grading. Normally I finish all of my edits with a color grading layer. So the ones that we have come from the generic, we are going on toward the details, just like the dodging and burning thing. And then we're just going to try to set a mood through color. So for working with color, I like doing a new field adjustment layer, and that's the layer that tops off all of my edits. Remember, it's a fill layer because we're going to do a color grading that's going to be generic for the whole photo. So I'm just going to name my layer color. And the tool that I'm going to use, it's my favorite tool in Capture One. It's not this one, it's a color balance. The color balance works exactly like color grading, well, kind of like what color grading looks like for movies. And it's going to allow us to add different dominants to shadows, midtones, and highlights separately. And there's some, once you master this tool, which is super intuitive, you're going to see how you can use it in your advantage to create your mood and create your own atmosphere in your images. If we stay with the photo as it is, it's looking nice, but I kind of have the feeling that it's just the colors that the camera brought up. So working with this tool, we can just choose not to stick with the colors that the camera brought up. We can just choose the colors that we want to show, the colors that serve the purpose of our story. So normally I start with the shadows. Let's just see how we would do this thing. So there is like all of these points here, and if I move them around, we're going to see how color grading is applied to the images. So what I normally like to do is adding a cooler tone in the shadows. So we would just go over right to the extreme of the circle, and that's going to be too much, but I'm just going to go around the circle and trying to choose the color that looks better for our image. So something cooler like this blue cyan tone is going to be nice. We could also choose green, that will be a different story. And normally I wouldn't do the warmer tones in the shadows. It looks a little bit like 80s or 90s thing, but for some pictures it does really work. So once I have chosen my tone, let's just stick, for example, with this cyan. Just going to reduce the saturation completely just by bringing it down all the way. And then I will just start bringing it up gradually. So that is looking better. Then with the highlights, I will just go all the way towards the opposite side of the color wheel. That's probably a good idea because that allows us to play with complementary colors, which is, you know, a little bit of color theory, you know, that's always a good idea. So let's just pick the yellow for the highlights and then just go up just a little bit. If we go too far, that's going to be too yellow. But if we stay somewhere around a third of the whole way or even a little bit lower, that's going to create a nice contrast with the shadows. And that's going to be looking so much better. There is also some little lights that we can adjust here. So it's a really nice effect that I like to do when I'm trying to go for the cinematic feel. Here in the shadows, we have the shadow control. And if we go a little bit up, you can see that it's like lifting up the shadows, but not in the way that the shadows light works. It's like kind of not so, like the black stops being black and starts being kind of grayish. It's kind of washed. And I really like this effect for this kind of edit, for this kind of photo. So that would be the end of it. That would be the final look of the edit. So something around here. And I think that we managed to have the cinematic feel and to have this kind of character that is actually telling a story. So this is what we had before, and this is what we have now. Everything done in Capture One, everything done basically through editing with light and color. So, questions, comments?
All right, everybody. Now's the time to ask any questions about portrait editing. Is there anything that maybe Maria didn't cover that you wanted to see that's related to color and portrait editing or any portrait editing types of things? Please submit any questions that you have through the Q&A portal.
We didn't have a lot of talkative people. Is that good or bad, Anthony?
I am not sure. It's kind of a first for me here that we don't have as many questions as we normally do, but you know, sometimes that does happen. Let's see. Oh, there we go. We've got another one. Can you show how to create a mask one more time? J. Mathis Bertosa asks. So yeah, actually, Maria, if you could show a couple of different ways to show it, either by can we do that quick? Do you have time?
Yeah.
To kind of like show hand drawing, or and then like using maybe the Luma range to draw one as well, because I think that that's a really great way to do it.
Okay, great. So let's just pick this other example and let's see in what different ways we can create a mask. So the first way to create a mask will be the fill adjustment layer that I've been using. So something like there, and voila, there's your mask. You don't have to mask anything else. You can just do, for example, like a contrast adjustment, something like that, right? The second way to create mask is to gradients. So we can create out of an empty adjustment layer. We can do, for example, a radial gradient that I also used in this session. Do, for example, you can see whenever I press the M and there is like this red part showing up, that's our mask. So we can, for example, use this to create a vignette as I did before. There is also, however, linear gradients. So I can just create another linear gradient to show you how it's done. So I can just draw this gradient and say, for example, okay, so here I want a little bit more brightness to make it look like there is like a shade of light on the face. So something like that. And that would be a linear mask, okay? So this is different ways to create masks. Another way, as Anthony was mentioning, would be probably the Luma range selection. So this would start out of a field adjustment layer. It's important that it's a field adjustment layer because this tool is modifying a mask that already exists, but it's not creating a mask per se. So we just start with this mask, and let's say that, for example, we want to kind of correct the parts of the skin that are too bright without affecting the rest of the highlights in the photo. So out of this field mask, we're just going to choose the Luma range tool up here. There you go. That's going to make this pop-up window appear. That's going to give us a different range of luminosity that we can work with. So this works like a histogram. So on the left, we have all of the things that are in the shadows, and on the right, we have the highlights. So in this case, we want to mask the highlights. So I'm just going to refine my selection just like so, and I'm just going to try to keep here the really bright highlights. I'm going to make a softer fall off to make sure that I'm not creating any artifacts. By increasing the radius, we can increase the softness of this mask, which we want to do in this case. Something like there. It's just maybe just a little bit softer. And then we can just click on apply. And that's a way to create a mask out of a Luma range selection, which is really useful. Now we can do, for example, like a highlight correction, or we can do, for example, well, basically anything we want. We can just do a skin tone correction just with these parts that are in the highlights. So something like there. So for example, something like that. Just like so, and then just affecting the areas that we want to work with without affecting the rest. There is a lot about masking in Capture One. Actually, the things that I've been doing here with the style brushes, so for example, the burning, if I press M, what I've been doing with the style brushes, even if we didn't notice, it was also masking. So you can just pick any of these brushes and create your own masks. So for example, if I want to do something like, let's say that, I don't know, I want to apply a different color grading to the hair for whatever reason. So I can just pick my regular brush and brush in. I'm just going to use a really high flow so you can see what is happening. So you can see I can just create the mask manually that we would do in any other software. There's just many different ways to create masks, and once you're more familiar with them, you can just pick the one that works better for each of the things you want to mask for each of your purposes.
So Maria, there's actually a relevant question that came in from Robert. He asks, is Luma Mask the best way if there's a lot of loose hair?
It depends on what you want to do. If you want to, for example, isolate the model from background, then that would be a pretty nice way to do it. If there's a white background or a black background, it could also be that we have a color background. And in that case, like here, for example, we have a background with a different color. The best way could be a color selection from the color editor. So there is not, as I said, it's not written in stone. There is different ways to achieve the same results. And it's up to you to we don't need to be an expert in every Capture One option, but it's definitely useful to know the different ways of masking so you can choose the best one for each of the cases. But for example, for this kind of photo, we could definitely do a Luma range selection to just mask out the background and keep the model separately. The funky hair color I gave her, right?
Yeah. All right. Does anybody else have any questions? Because we are reaching about the end of the webinar. So if there's anything less, I think we just got one more popped up. What about using a magic wand to select or deselect? Jim just asked.
Okay. There is not a magic wand per se, but what we call it in Capture One is a magic brush. So let's just go, for example, with this example. This is actually also edited, so I'm just going to create a new variant. So for example, if we wanted to mask this background, we could use the magic brush in the same way that we would use a magic wand. So the magic brush is next to the regular brush. It's just with this little magic sparks. So we can just pick this tool, and we can choose also to sample the entire photo to make sure that this part of the background will be also sampled. And we can just make a little brush in, and then that's going to calculate the mask automatically. So you can see now, well, it's red and red, so I hope that you can see the difference. It masks the background entirely in sampling the entire photo. And I guess it's pretty much the same as a magic wand.
It does seem pretty similar.
Yeah. There is a last question I can see. Is there a limit to the amount of healing spots you can do, say on skin in Capture One? There is no limit of healing spots. There used to be in previous versions, but since version 20, there is no limit anymore. So you can do pretty much a lot of healing.
Yeah, I can personally attest to this because I still shoot a lot of film myself, and some of it is instant film, and I quite often will get dust on those instant prints while they are drying, and I use Capture One exclusively after I have scanned it and digitized it to do my color correction and cleanup before I put it on my website or Instagram, and I will use hundreds of points sometimes depending upon how dirty that Polaroid or negative may have been.
That is actually really cool, and I'm also doing that. I'm also using Capture One for color correcting my negatives, and if there is enough people interested, we can maybe do a session on that in the future. That would be really cool.
We have actually become we've done a lot with digitization of negatives and positives here at PhotoCare, so I think we can absolutely make that happen. We can make a really nice webinar on that if folks are interested. That said, does anybody else have any last questions before we finish up today? Has everybody seen everything they'd like to in regards to portrait editing specifically? Keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier in the chat, we do have a promo code right now, and I realized I had only sent it to the panelists the first time, and I did resend it out to everyone. So if you did not see that, I can actually, I'll post it really quick again here at the bottom. We do have a ability to save on Capture One if you purchase it through our website or call the store. It is only valid through the 21st. So if you are looking to step up and start with Capture One 22, either click the link to our sales page on our website or give the store a ring and mention you attended this webinar. But the savings, the 20% off, is only through the 21st. Yeah. I really want to thank Maria for being here. I want to thank Liz for also being in the chat. Looks like there is one last question that may have popped. How can I rewatch this webinar? So the webinar will be on our YouTube page. There is a link that I just posted up in the chat section that you can find our YouTube page. It'll probably be either the end of this week or early next week. We've only got one person who handles the website and that kind of stuff. So when he has the chance to convert this file and get it uploaded, we'll get it up, but there should be a follow-up email that will come out to everybody that will let you know that it is live and you can check it out so you can rewatch, because I do understand that sometimes these things move quick. Everybody learns at a different pace. You want to be able to rewatch, pause, and all that to get the further understanding. That said, you can always give us a ring if you've purchased Capture One here. I am if you've purchased Capture One with PhotoCare, I am your tech support person, your first line of defense, and I can certainly help you with that. We also
That's a really good support person.
Thank you, Maria. We are looking to be doing in-person Capture One trainings again at some point once the whole situation with everyone's health and everything has maybe gotten a little better with the coronavirus situation here in New York. But that said, can check out all the other webinars we've done. We'll be recording more. Thank you so much, Maria. Really awesome having you here on the first one. Can't wait to do the next one. And yeah, it looks like actually a couple people have commented they want to see a negative editing one, so that's cool. We've got a couple of people said thank you, great job, Maria, which honestly it was excellent. Very, very happy with how today turned out. But yeah, cool. I hope to see you all in the next one. Stay tuned. Check out our events page. It will mention everything else that we are working on. Have a happy holiday. Maria, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll see you on the next one.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye, everybody.